The cameras didn't just record history that night, they swallowed it whole. 23 million Americans were glued to their screens, waiting for another predictable Trump performance, the bravado, the insults, the circus. But what they got instead was something no one had scripted. In a Senate chamber gleaming with marble and tension, Denzel Washington, yes, that Denzel, sat at the witness table, calm but coiled like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Trump had expected an easy win, a made-for-TV spectacle where his interruptions would drown out substance and his smirk would carry the night. But he didn't know that Denzel had come armed, not with bluster, but with something deadlier, precision. The silence in the room was surgical. You could hear the hum of the microphones, the shuffle of papers, even the nervous throat clears of senators who sensed they were about to witness more than testimony. Denzel's gaze didn't wander. He looked forward, steady, like a man rehearsing the verdict of a nation. "This isn't about politics," he began, his voice low, deliberate enough that every word felt like a gavel strike. "This is about truth. And truth has teeth." The opening line detonated across the chamber. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Senators leaned in, their posture betraying the weight of that single sentence. Trump, perched 2 seats away, leaned back in mock boredom, lips twitching into a smirk. But behind the cameras, America had already felt it, the shift, the hook, the moment they couldn't look away. Because what no one knew, not yet, was that in less than an hour, Donald Trump would face something he had never truly faced before, humiliation not scripted by late-night comedians, not softened by pundits, but delivered, raw, undeniable, on the record. And the man holding the scalpel was Denzel Washington. Trump shifted in his chair, his trademark swagger wrapping the chamber like cheap cologne. He drummed his fingers on the polished wood, signaling impatience, signaling dominance. Cameras caught it, of course, they always did, but across from him, Denzel didn't flinch. His presence wasn't performance, it was precision. "Mr. Washington," a senator prompted, "please explain the nature of your testimony." He opened a thick folder, each page marked, highlighted, tabbed like a surgeon's instruments. "What you'll hear tonight isn't speculation," he said. "It's documented harm. It's patterns of power twisted into weapons." He paused, letting the weight land. "And one man at this table has turned that into theater." Gasps, small, involuntary, broke from the back row. Everyone knew who he meant. Trump leaned forward, smirk widening, ready to pounce. "Here we go again," he muttered into his mic, his voice dripping with mockery. "Another Hollywood script. You practicing for an Oscar, Denzel?" Laughter rippled through a handful of aides, brittle and forced. But Denzel didn't blink. "You think this is performance?" His voice sharpened. "Tell that to the families torn apart by policies you signed in ink and paraded as victories. Tell that to the children in ER waiting rooms while you mocked them on Twitter." The room froze. Suddenly, the hearing wasn't routine, it was a battlefield. Trump expected shouting, expected chaos he could dominate. Instead, he met silence, heavy, suffocating silence. For the first time, his smirk faltered, and America leaned closer to their screens. Because humiliation doesn't happen all at once. It begins with the realization that the old tricks, the insults, the laughter, the spin, no longer work. Trump had just realized it. Denzel had just proved it. And the clash was only beginning. Trump leaned into his microphone, voice booming like a carnival barker who thought volume was victory. "You people act like I'm the villain," he sneered, jabbing a finger across the table. "But let's be honest, no one here had the guts to fix the system. I did. I built the best economy, the strongest borders, the toughest deals. And now this actor wants to lecture me about truth?" The chamber erupted in overlapping murmurs. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, others scribbled notes they pretended not to understand. The reporters smelled blood. Trump was in his element, swinging insults like a man throwing haymakers in the dark. But the mistake was clear: haymakers can miss. Precision never does. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't even lean forward. He simply lifted one page from his folder and let the silence tighten before speaking. "This," he said, his tone steady, is the GAO report from your administration, page 47. It states, in exact figures, that your Medicaid cuts projected to strip health coverage from nearly 11 million children. 11 million. That's not an actor's line. That's your government's math. Trump scoffed, but his eyes flickered, a microsecond of recognition the cameras didn't miss. Fake numbers, he muttered, but it landed flat. For the first time, his rebuttal didn't ignite laughter, it dissolved into silence, the kind of silence that exposes weakness. Denzel leaned in slightly, just enough to close the distance. You call children's health care fake. You call their suffering theater. But here's the truth, Mr. Trump, the only performance here is yours. And for once, America is watching it without the laugh track. The room snapped tighter, like a string pulled to breaking point. Trump tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway, more bark than bravado. The humiliation hadn't landed yet, but the descent had begun, and every camera was recording the unraveling. Trump wasn't used to silence. Silence had always been his enemy, a void he filled with noise, repetition, insult. So he slammed his palm on the table, the sharp crack ricocheting through the chamber. You think you're some kind of hero? He barked. You're an actor playing a role. You don't know politics, you don't know sacrifice, you don't know me. His voice shook the microphones, but not the man across from him. Denzel adjusted his glasses with surgical calm, like a surgeon preparing the next incision. You're right, he replied, tone even. I don't know you personally. But I know what your words have done. I know the children whose asthma medication vanished when your budget passed. I know the families who buried loved ones because clinics closed under your watch. And I know that truth doesn't need applause, it only needs a witness. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Even Trump's allies shifted uneasily, unwilling to meet his eyes. Reporters typed furiously, the sound like gunfire echoing across marble. Trump smirked, desperate to regain control. You talk about witnesses? Fine, let's ask the American people. They know I tell it like it is. They know I'm strong enough to say what snowflakes like you can't handle. He jabbed his finger again, but this time, the gesture looked frantic, not commanding. Denzel didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he unfolded a map across the table, counties shaded red, each representing thousands of children at risk. He slid it forward until it touched Trump's hand. Strength isn't mocking the weak. Strength is protecting them. You had the power, and you used it to turn human lives into punchlines. The chamber froze. The cameras zoomed. And for the first time in years, America saw Trump not as the conductor of chaos, but as its clown, cornered, exposed, his old weapons dull against the precision of a man who didn't need theatrics to dismantle him. The room pulsed with a dangerous rhythm. Every camera lens was locked in, every phone recording, every reporter's pen scratching as if history itself demanded documentation. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrow, his voice booming with the aggression of a man who refused to lose center stage. Let me make this perfectly clear, he growled, jabbing the air. This country doesn't need lectures from Hollywood. It doesn't need phony prophets pretending they care about real Americans. What we need is strength, not sob stories, not bedtime tales for children who should have grown up already. The words hit with venom, but instead of applause, the chamber sank into silence. A silence that didn't empower Trump, it suffocated him. For the first time, his insults sounded recycled, brittle, like glass cracking under pressure. Denzel slowly rose to his feet. He didn't need to raise his voice. His very presence commanded the air. Real Americans? He asked, voice low, steady, wrapping the room like smoke. Do you mean the single mother in Kentucky who works 3 jobs and still can't afford her child's insulin? Do you mean the veteran in Ohio who served this nation only to come home and be told his PTSD treatment is too expensive? Do you mean the millions of children who wake up each morning not knowing if they'll see a doctor this year? Trump tried to cut in, fake news, fake sob stories, but the crowd didn't follow him this time. The weight of Denzel's questions pressed too hard. He wasn't offering slogans. He was holding up mirrors, forcing every senator, every spectator, and every viewer at home to see what Trump had dismissed as invisible. Phones wavered, some lowered as if people realized they were no longer just recording a spectacle, they were recording a reckoning. And in that suspended moment, Trump's usual dominance cracked. His voice faltered, drowned not by boos or cheers, but by something far more dangerous to him, respect for another man's calm courage. The room wasn't Trump's anymore. It belonged to Denzel. The air inside the chamber had grown heavy, as though every marble column pressed down on the shoulders of those present. For nearly an hour, the exchange had been circling the same battlefield, Trump throwing practiced smirks and barbed lines, Denzel countering with calm precision. But then, something cracked. A remark, half sneer and half dismissal, slipped from Trump's mouth. You can play the actor all you want, but politics isn't Hollywood. Out here, the lights don't make you a leader. He leaned back, convinced he had landed the line that would seal the night. Cameras clicked, some audience members chuckled nervously, but most simply froze. The insult hung in the air like smoke, daring someone to wave it away. Denzel didn't move immediately. His stillness was louder than any rebuttal. He adjusted his blazer once, leaned forward, and with measured clarity spoke, "Funny. Because I've seen more truth in 2 hours on a film set than I've seen in 20 years of men in power treating this nation like their stage." The silence was electric. No shouting, no dramatics, just a voice sharpened by restraint. The cameras, almost on instinct, zoomed closer. Even those who weren't fans of Denzel felt it, the weight of words spoken without haste, the balance of fury and composure. A senator in the back whispered, "That landed." What shifted wasn't volume, it was alignment. The crowd, once uncertain, began nodding. The murmurs grew supportive, then bold. The journalists typed faster, knowing history was crystallizing in real time. And Trump, for the first time that night, adjusted in his chair, breaking eye contact, sipping water he didn't need. The dynamic had changed. This was no longer an interview. It was a reckoning. The air in the chamber had thickened into something that felt almost physical, like fog pressing against the skin. Every eye was on Trump as he tried to claw back control. His voice rose in desperation, not command. "This country doesn't need actors preaching morality," he sneered, the words sharp, brittle. "It needs leaders, not people performing for applause." He chuckled at his own line, waiting for the audience to reward him with laughter. But the silence stretched on, long and suffocating, until his smirk began to crack. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, capturing the sweat forming along his temples. Denzel leaned forward, elbows light on the table, face unshaken. He didn't rush, he didn't interrupt, he let Trump's words hang, suffocating under their own emptiness. And then, in a voice steady enough to cut glass, he spoke. "You call it pretending," he said, each syllable deliberate, "but I've spent my life telling truths that people could see themselves in. That's why they remember my words." He paused, letting the silence thicken. "You've spent your life pretending cruelty is strength. That's why they only remember your scandals." The impact landed like thunder. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, then typed faster than they ever had. Aides looked down at their shoes. Some in the gallery gasped audibly, others began clapping before they realized they'd broken protocol. On camera, the contrast was unmistakable, Trump shrinking behind his podium, Denzel upright, composed, his voice carrying the weight of dignity. This was no outburst, no viral quip. It was a dismantling, surgical and final. Trump had come to dominate with spectacle. Instead, he became the spectacle, a man revealed as smaller than the silence that followed him. The hearing had barely adjourned when the explosion began, not in the chamber, but across every glowing screen in America. Within minutes, the clip of Denzel's calm yet devastating line spread like wildfire. Networks rushed to splice it into their broadcasts. Cable anchors, usually quick to drown moments in commentary, played the exchange raw, uncut. Headlines raced each other: Washington floors Trump, humiliation in real time, the scandal they'll never forget. On Twitter, The hashtag not pretending trended in less than an hour, gathering millions of mentions from both allies and critics. On conservative outlets, hosts scrambled to reframe the scene, insisting Trump had simply been tough, that Washington had taken things too personally. But the footage betrayed them. Side-by-side edits compared Trump's fuming interruptions with Denzel's steady stillness. Commentators replayed the moment Trump waited for laughs that never came. Silence, once his weapon, had turned traitor. The public wasn't passive. Teachers shared the clip with students, framing it as a lesson in dignity under fire. Activists called it a blueprint for resistance without rage. Even late-night comedians, often cautious around Trump's shadow, leaned in. One quipped, "Turns out the best way to silence a bully is to let him hear his own echo." The audience roared. Meanwhile, Trump's allies grew frantic. Advisors whispered about damage control. Press releases floated phrases like "fake performance" and "Hollywood politics." But each defense only amplified the clip. The internet didn't buy spin when the raw footage told its own story. And in living rooms, offices, and diners, Americans watched on repeat, mesmerized not by shouting, but by restraint. Trump had aimed to belittle, to bait Denzel into anger. Instead, he revealed himself as desperate, dependent on cruelty to fill the void where vision should be. The fallout wasn't noise, it was recognition. A nation had seen the mask slip, and they wouldn't forget it. The morning after the hearing, the world hadn't calmed, it had sharpened. Front pages carried still images of Denzel leaning forward, eyes steady, while Trump looked off balance, his lips twisted mid-smirk. The photographs said more than any headline could. Editorials poured in, calling it a turning point, a lesson in moral authority. Cable news hosts debated not whether Trump had lost, but how badly. Some measured it in polling dips, others in late-night ridicule, but ordinary people measured it differently, in the way they felt seen. In Mount Vernon, Denzel's hometown, a mural appeared almost overnight. Spray paint and brushes captured the line, "They only remember your scandals," beneath a portrait of him, jaw firm, gaze forward. On social media, people posted stories of times they had been belittled, told they were pretending, and how staying calm had carried them through. His words had left the studio and taken root in kitchens, classrooms, boardrooms. Denzel himself stayed quiet. He didn't run to the cameras, didn't grant interviews. He spent the evening with his family, answering only one text from a childhood friend, "You said what we've all been carrying for years." For him, the victory wasn't in the trending hashtags. It was in the silence afterward, the rare kind of silence not born of dismissal, but of respect. Trump, by contrast, fumed. His team scrambled to flood the airwaves, but every attempt rang hollow. The more he spoke, the smaller he seemed compared to the stillness of that one moment. He had lost not in volume, but in measure. And as the noise slowly began to fade, one truth remained. What America had witnessed wasn't a clash of egos. It was the drawing of a line, the kind that divides spectacle from substance, arrogance from dignity. Denzel hadn't shouted it, he had shown it. And that made all the difference. Weeks later, the frenzy had cooled, but the echoes had not. The clip no longer dominated the news cycle, yet it lived on in classrooms, sermons, and community meetings. In barbershops, people replayed it on their phones like an anthem. In college seminars, professors broke down the cadence, showing students how dignity can dismantle cruelty without ever raising its volume. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore, it was a case study in presence, a new standard for how power could be challenged. For Trump, the humiliation clung like a second skin. Every rally, every appearance, protesters held signs with Denzel's words. Memes mocked him, but the sting wasn't in satire. It was in the way his authority had been punctured on live television, not by anger, but by calm. He had been stripped of his favorite weapon, control of the narrative, and it was never fully returned. For Denzel, the legacy unfolded quietly. He never repeated the line, never tried to capitalize on it. He spoke instead about policy, about justice, about the lives at stake behind the numbers. Yet audiences leaned in closer than ever before, because they had seen proof that strength didn't need spectacle. His silence had once been misread as submission. Now, it was recognized as power. The story settled into something larger than politics. It became personal for those who had been dismissed as too emotional, too dramatic, or pretending. Teachers hung the quote on classroom walls. Parents repeated it to children preparing for their first job interviews. Activists used it as armor in city council meetings and protests. And so, long after the hashtags faded, the legacy remained, a reminder that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply refuses to shrink. Sometimes, the strongest words are delivered in the calmest tone. And sometimes, one sentence is enough to change how a nation remembers both the man who said it, and the man who couldn't withstand it. What America saw that night wasn't just a clash between two men, it was the unveiling of truth. Denzel didn't shout, he didn't crumble, he didn't play small. He reminded us all that real strength doesn't need to humiliate to be heard. And long after the lights faded, one sentence still echoes: you don't need to roar to carry power, you only need the courage not to shrink.